All right, hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and I'm finishing up my solo show, Fan Requests, and I've got about four of them, fan requests that I want to finish up before I've got a jam packed September. My gosh, five debates, depending on whether or not I can make the time to finish for Hugh Ferry. The Shroud Wars debate with Hugh Ferry on his image forming hypothesis, me versus Hugh. And I'm going to have Kevin Non-Tradicath and hopefully Daniel Lowry moderating that debate. Um, Kevin's agreed to do so. I still haven't heard from Daniel if he's interested or not, but I'll ask again once I'm finished preparing. But I also have a debate, Evil Christianity on the Shroud of Turin coming up, but we're going to be focusing more on the philosophical question for most of that show on his issue with miracles, his anti supernatural bias, because anything I say on the Shroud, no matter how logical or evidenced, uh, Mike from Evil Christianity is just not listening. He's closed to it because, oh, if you're talking a miracle, as he says, his brain shuts down. He can't even consider it. So that's what we're going to be doing, a debate on that in early September or mid September, because we need to tackle that elephant in the room. Otherwise, we're just kind of wasting our time talking about the Shroud, because anything I say won't really matter. Outside of Shroud debates, I also was invited to do not one, but two debates with famous Muslim apologists on the Reason and Theology podcast. So on September 10th, I'll be on the Reason and Theology podcast with Michael Lofton and the Orthodox Muslim. And we're going to be debating the topic of is Muhammad in our Christian Bibles? Is he predicted in our Christian Bibles or not? I will be arguing he is not. Also, the next week, on the 18th, I believe, of September, I have another debate with another famous Muslim apologist, this time debating the general topic, is Muhammad a prophet? I'm going to be arguing, no, he's a false prophet. For that. And then finally, the fifth debate that I've got lined up is between me and an atheist, from Joan from Modern Atheism. We're going to be talking about my case for the resurrection, both the historical evidence and the scientific evidence from the Shroud of Turin. So that'll be on September 11th. That I'll be recording that, at least. As to when they get posted, we'll see. But at least they'll be up on their channels on those dates. I've also reached out to Dr. Cheryl White to come on to speak about her brand new book about the Shroud. So hopefully that will be happening. Phil Bear, we're talking about his Sokolka mod prayer app, which he's done some modifications on. Larry Stolley will be coming on to speak about Hebrews at some point. A whole bunch, plus all my other regularly scheduled shows that I had planned for September. I'm still in talks with Gary Habermas. Hopefully he'll be coming on to speak about Volume 3 and addressing some skeptical objections, common skeptical objections and that sort of thing. And we'll see what happens with Mike Licona. I'm was supposed to go on his show to speak about the Shroud months ago, and I haven't heard anything yet. So I still want to give him some more time and stuff. Maybe I'll reach out in October. But yeah, basically I'm jam-packed with lots of shows. So anyways, this is about the fan requests. So without further ado, there are four fan requests. And the first comes from Mark B. from the UK, who's a new, and he has issues. He asked me to tackle Old Testament issues. And I've done a show for him already. But this time he wanted, what about the Gog and Magog from Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39? What is that about? Well, I've now done my research into it, and I think I've come to what I believe this is talking about. So just by way of introduction, there are two passages in Scripture which have cemented the name Gog and Magog in the minds of modern Christians whenever we think of the apocalypse and the end times or the eschaton. So the first is this Ezekiel's chapters 38 and 39 in prophecy, and also in the biblical book of Revelation, chapter 20 in the New Testament, dealing with, again, the end days. It mentions this Gog and Magog. And both of these passages, so they reference Gog, which is a figure named Gog, and he has a huge army that attacks the people of God, Israel, which we know in the New Testament Messianic era includes Christians. So it's Jews and Gentiles. And these prophecies are well known and much disputed. There's a lot of debate as to what exactly is this. Now, while these two passages, it has to be noted that Ezekiel 38 and 39 versus Revelation 20, even though they use the same names, Gog and Magog, all biblical scholars have recognized that they're actually referring to different things. They clearly talk about not the same people and not the same event. This war. So there's actually two wars mentioned here, both of them called Gog and Magog. So the duplicated uses of this name, the name Gog and Magog in Revelation chapter 20, is just to show that these people demonstrate the same rebellion against God and the same antagonism towards God as those in Ezekiel chapter 38 to 39. It's not saying it's literally the same armies. We know for a fact from the context, and all scholars and Christians agree that they're different armies and they're different wars, they're different events, and they involve different people. Okay, so looking into a little bit more detail. So Ezekiel chapter 38 to 39 clearly uses the terms Gog and Magog to reference a battle involving the forces of evil against the nation of Israel, whereby Israel in the end will be victorious thanks to God's supernatural intervention. Now, historically speaking, the name Magog, he was a grandson of Noah, and we learn about him in Genesis chapter 10, verse 2. And the descendants of Magog, we know, settled far to the north of Israel, likely somewhere in Europe, perhaps northern Asia, as we find out from Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 2. And this Magog, it seems to be used here to refer to kind of quote unquote northern barbarians in general. And obviously, these northern barbarians likely had a connection to Magog the person from the book of Genesis. Now, the people of Magog are described as being skilled warriors. Okay, so these skilled northern barbarians are going to come against Israel in a battle, the battle of Gog and Magog. And Israel, with the supernatural help of the Lord our God, is going to wipe them out. Evil satanic bad guys go away, and Israel is victorious. Now, Gog, this is described as being an individual person in the Old Testament who is, quote unquote, of the land of Magog. So they think it's probably a prince of Rosh or Meshach and Tubal. This comes from Ezekiel chapter 38, verses 2 to 3. And once again, elsewhere, the Bible does mention different people who also share the name Gog, right? There's a lot of Dales out there. There's a lot of people with the name David, Mike, John. They're not all the same person. It's the same with this name Gog. In fact, the name Gog, it refers to three people, different people in the Bible. So the first, Gog, is someone just mentioned in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 4. Nothing special about him, where Gog is said to be one of the sons of Joel, a descendant of Reuben. And of course, we also have Gog in Revelation chapter 20, verse 8, where he's the leader of history's final battle. Forces of Satan versus the true saved of Jesus Christ and the true Israel. So the name Gog is used for the leader of that satanic army at that time, for the final battle. And then there's Gog, who's the leader of the armies, or the prince of Rosh and that sort of thing, leading this army in this other battle before the Revelation final battle, and has no relationship to the Gog of First Chronicles. Okay, now there have been several suggestions as to who the Gog of Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 39 is. So one of the interpretations by biblical scholars is that he's the ruthless ruler of ancient Lydia. He was known as Gugu or Gyges. Secondly, he could be a figure from ancient history called Gagu of the land of Saki. which is kind of a region in northern Assyria. Again, makes sense. We know Assyria was a northern barbaric and barbarous satanic empire that really persecuted Israel during the time of the prophets, such as Isaiah and that. Number 3, it could just be an official title, such as Pharaoh in Egypt is a title. Or 4, it could be a general term for any enemy of God's people. Under this way, it comes from the loan word from Sumerian, Gog, which translates as darkness. I think this latter reading makes the most sense in the context of Ezekiel 38 to 39. So I go with interpretation number 4. I think it is a cryptic reference to the combined enemies of God. All the Gentile, these northern barbarian nations coming from the north against Israel, and who already were evidently operative in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom of Babylon at the time of Ezekiel. So these would be the forces of evil and darkness as led by Satan, aka the Prince of Darkness, and the ruler of the end times, Babylon. Babylon, the great whore Babylon, mentioned in the apocalyptic literature, which that kingdom started back with the literal Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. The forces of darkness were standing behind these various rulers, and as we learn in the prophet Daniel about the various kingdoms leading up all the way until the end times. So there is this connection between the forces of evil and Satan standing behind the armies and political princes and figures and leaders of the world, all the way up until this end times battle, which is going to take place. So in order to interpret this, there are a couple different interpretations. So the first way is the literal interpretation. And this is the way I think Mark B. would probably take it. Again, just guessing. I don't want to make assumptions, but okay, so how would we understand this? If we take this there's a literal battle, this all literally happens, and we also have to take the Revelation 20 battle as a different literal battle that takes place. So in order to take it literally, it's important to recognize that Gog and Magog of Ezekiel 38 and 39 is different from the one in Revelation 20. So in other words, we have to posit 2 battles with different people, different Gogs, and different Magogs being involved. And the reason for this is, look, there are 4 reasons. Number 1, in the battle of Ezekiel chapter 38 to 39, the armies come primarily from the north and involve only a few nations of the earth. But the battle in Revelation chapter 20 involves all the satanic nations outside of Israel. So armies will come from all directions, not just from the north. This is one of the reasons why biblical scholars know these are different battles. Secondly, there's no mention of Satan in the context of Ezekiel chapter 38 to 39. In Revelation chapter 20, verse 7, the context clearly places the battle at the end of the millennium with Satan as the primary character. Whereas the battle in Ezekiel 38 to 39, yes, Satan is standing behind this prince of Magog, or this leader from the land of Magog, but it's not the all-out final battle where Satan is unleashed and all the forces of evil combined come all together at once and are once and for all decisively defeated. Ezekiel 38, 39 is not talking about that, so it's clearly a different battle here. 3, Ezekiel chapter 39 states that the dead will be buried for 7 months. So, look, if this is talking about the same battle as Revelation chapter 20, there would be no need to bury the dead, because this battle is basically immediately following Revelation chapter 20, verses 8 to 9. So this is where we would get the great white throne of Jesus' judgment. And then heaven would be present, right? The new heavens and the earth would be destroyed and replaced by the new heavens and the new earth. There wouldn't be 7 months going on where, people are just dying as they used to and you've got to bury them. That doesn't make sense. Fourthly, The battle in Ezekiel chapter 38 to 39 is used by God to bring Israel back to him. The purpose of this Gog and Magog battle is to bring Israel back to him. And under the literalistic understanding, the way that literal Christians have put this together is by positing the millennium, a 1,000-year period of where the kingdom of Jesus is on earth and Jesus is ruling. So they say, well, there's the first battle, Ezekiel chapter 38 to 39. Then there's the 1,000-year millennial kingdom. Then we finally get the battle in the book of Revelation, the final battle of Gog and Magog in Revelation chapter 20, where all the rebellious are destroyed without any more opportunity for repentance. So that's the literalistic understanding. Now, it all depends on, okay, well, is there this thing called the millennial kingdom? And essentially, it's premillennialism. They're the only people of the different positions who accept this 1,000-year period as being literal. I don't go for that view. I think millennialism is true. So there is no literal 1,000-year millennial kingdom. It's just symbolic. Now, just to put this into perspective, so there are three different perspectives on the subject of this 1,000-year millennial kingdom. So there's one, the amillennialists, myself, which says there's no millennium at all. There's no literal 1,000-year period. There are post-millennialists, and then there are premillennialists. As I said, only premillennialism takes the 1,000-year period to be literal. The amillennialist treats the millennium purely symbolically. The postmillennialist also views this 1,000-year period as symbolically, but they have an additional element in that the millennium is sort of an idyllic period of human history that will arrive here on earth, literally, as a result of the propagation and worldwide triumph of the gospel. And thus, it'll involve the subduing of the forces of unbelief and sin. So what kind of differentiates amillennialists from postmillennialists is this sort of literal triumphalism aspect. So there is sort of the triumph of Jesus' kingdom will come in literally before the final battle and before he comes. But it's not necessarily a literal 1,000-year period of a millennial kingdom. Okay, so why do I prefer the amillennial perspective? I'll give 5 reasons. So number 1, the amillennialist points out that the millennium is taught in only one passage in Scripture, a single one, and sound hermeneutical doctrine and practices says that you should be very cautious when appealing to only one scripture, let alone a scripture. This scripture is Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 to 10. It's not found anywhere else in scripture, and it's based on a single passage that is in the apocalyptic genre. Apocalyptic genre is very symbolic, very hard to understand, and it's rife with a lot of symbolism and imagery ranging from dragons, beasts, monsters, a many-eyed lamb on the throne in heaven and stuff. And we know for a fact all these are not literal. So that's the first reason. Secondly, the amillennialist points out that Scripture teaches there's only one resurrection of the dead, general resurrection of the dead. There's not going to be two, such as having a rapture and then this millennial kingdom and stuff like that, were issued in for 1,000 years, and then Jesus comes back again and finishes it off or something like that. There's only one resurrection. There are not two resurrections. And the premillennial view strongly implies or entails that there would have to be two resurrections almost. 3, the idea of sinners, people actively sinning, living alongside glorified, resurrected, righteous saints, is an intolerable thought. Look, there's a reason hell exists as a quarantine zone. We become infected by sin, and that's why we can't have sinners up in heaven infecting us and bringing their sin disease to other people who have been cleansed from it, because we can sin spreads, it diffuses out. just like goodness will do so. So that's the whole reason we need to, people who are persistent, unrepentant sinners go to hell. So they don't infect heaven and corrupt heaven, turning it into hell through their sin disease and stuff like that. But yet, if you take this view, the literal view and the premillennial view and the stuff like that, you would have sinners who are literally living alongside these glorified, resurrected, and righteous saints, thereby infecting us with their sins against us, which will make us want to sinfully, get revenge against them or retaliate against them in some sinful way. So yeah, it just seems inconceivable to envision what the Bible's talking about at the general resurrection and the return of Jesus triumphantly coming. He's back, but only within this little 1,000 kingdom for 1,000 years, and sinners, they're all living out around it, but they're still in the world, and there's this mixture of people still living in their sins and the glorified, purified, righteous saints. That doesn't make sense to me, biblically speaking. That isn't what the eschaton, according to the biblical writers, envision. Fourth, if the millennium Christ is present and reigning as described, then how can people persist in sin? So again, if he's come and he's conquered the forces of evil and stuff like that and set up his kingdom, the New Testament is clear. When he sets up his kingdom, the new heavens and the new earth, it's all evil is totally destroyed, and he is reigning supreme over everyone. But if you take the literalistic view, that you have to say, well, that's not true. He's actually not reigning supreme. He's not reigning over the world. He's reigning over his little corner in Israel, and that's it. He has no control over the sinful wretches living outside of his minor little kingdom in the nation of Israel for the 1,000-year period. So I don't think that is consistent with the millennial kingdom idea. Is inconsistent with the biblical notion of what Christ will do once and for all when he returns at the second coming. The Bible doesn't nowhere says, his first coming, he atones for sin, he dies, he comes as a servant, and then secondly, he comes as a minor reigning king, one of many on the earth, but working, he has his one tiny little righteous kingdom for 1,000 years, while the rest of the sinful leaders continue to reign supreme without bowing the knee to Christ. But don't worry, 1,000 years later, then Jesus will finally have his third coming, where he destroys all of the forces of evil, all on the earth, and reigns truly supreme. That's not it's just a two-step process. He has his first coming as the servant, and then he returns and boom, destroys all of sin, conquers the entire world, and everyone bows the knee to him in triumph. That it's a two-step process is what the Bible envisions, but premillennialism has to posit a three-step process almost. Fifthly, and finally, the amillennialist says that the millennium serves no purpose. Look, why? It doesn't make sense. Why would we even have such a thing? Why would we have this 1,000-year or millennial kingdom on earth? Why not simply just, upon people being raised from the dead and judged, go to the eternal state of heaven or hell, and this new heavens and new earth be established? That's much more simpler. And that seems to be what the biblical writers and New Testament authors, as well as what the Old Testament people had in mind when God came and conquered sin at the end of the world. Okay, so given that amillennialism is the preferred view compared to a literalistic premillennial view, what would be the symbolic or amillennial interpretation of Gog and Magog? Okay, so amillennialism makes more sense of the symbolic nature of the number 1,000 in Revelation chapter 20. In other texts, 1,000 rarely, if ever, is meant to be taken literally or with arithmetic, medical precision, right? It's one of these numbers that's special. It's a nice round number that we know, biblical scholars know, the Jews used this, and so did the Christians in the early church. So yeah, I think the 1,000 is basically, based on biblical usage, it's always used figuratively and hyperbolically And also, the amillennial reading of Revelation alone makes sense of the obvious parallels between the war of Revelation 16, 19, and 20. Again, this parallel is reinforced when we note that the imagery in Ezekiel chapter 39 related to Gog and Magog is used to describe both the battle in Revelation 19, verses 17 to 21, and the battle in Revelation 20. Again, these are different battles still. And both of them in Revelation 20 and Revelation 19 cite Gog and Magog from Ezekiel 39, but are relating them to different battles, showing that there's some kind of typological or symbolic relationship there. It seems clear that the author's intent is that these are meant to be one and the same battle, known as the Armageddon battle, that consummates the defeat of all of God's enemies at the time of Christ's second coming.
So just a quick edit to clarify what I'm saying here. So Revelation chapter 20 and the battles in Revelation 19 are symbolic, non-literal in the details, typological references to the battle of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. What do I think Ezekiel chapter 38 to 39 is, and again, it's typologies for the final battle. Ezekiel chapter 38 to 39, I think, serves as a typology for the end times battle. And so it's referencing a literal battle that will happen in the end times before Jesus comes. That's one of the signs of the end times coming and Jesus' return coming. And it serves as this archetype of the end times coming in, as the signpost for the end times coming in. So that's what I think the Gog and Magog in Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 39 is. It is a literal battle that will happen in the end of days, right at the beginning, during the Messianic era itself, which is one of the signs that initiates the final end time battle of Gog and Magog mentioned in Revelation chapter 20 and Revelation 19 and elsewhere. All these symbolic battles of the one final ultimate battle where all the forces of evil are defeated. So this battle between the northern barbarians and Israel, which will take place in just before the onset and just before Jesus' return, typifies and signals that, okay, Jesus is returning soon, and the final battle between the forces of Magog, aka the forces of Satan and evil, will finally and once and all be destroyed in the final upcoming battle. So that's my interpretation, just to clarify there.
We cannot allow a singular apocalyptic tale to wag the entire epistolatory dog, as it were. So, in other words, we must not force the whole of Scripture to dance to the tune of one single apocalyptic text in Revelation 20. I think that would be foolish. Thus, what's my take on the battle of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 39? It is a battle where the forces of evil and Satan will come in the form of northern barbarians. They will attack Israel, and Israel will wipe them out and destroy them with the supernatural help of God. This is symbolic of a single literal battle at the end of time. This same battle that will take place in Revelation 20 and elsewhere and stuff, and other battles and stuff like that. So that's my take on that, doing the best I can. Again, eschatology is not my thing. I'm not a scholar in that. So I just did my best to kind of say what I think is the most appropriate. But again, check out on my slides, I include in the notes, which it'll be on my blog. So go to the YouTube video description, click on my blog, and then go to the slides, and you can see I give the links in the notes on my slides, so you can access and read the scholars that I'm getting my ideas from on that front. Now we go to fan request number 2 on the Great Isaiah Scroll. By the way, before I get into the next fan request, just a note, so YouTube has become screwed up. I no longer get notifications when I get YouTube comments, and even going into my YouTube studio, it's hard to keep track. It's almost like YouTube is not alerting me or notifying me of every single comment that's coming in, even when I go into the YouTube studio and stuff. So it's kind of hit or miss as to whether I get notified. I only get a few notifications now. So I just wanted the audience to know that I'm not ignoring you. I usually I have a small enough audience that I tried to respond where appropriate to every single person that I could, that commented and stuff like that. So if you're not getting a response going forward, just know that's not me ignoring you. That's YouTube no longer notifying me and not even giving me any way to figure out whether I've been getting the comments or not. It's not even updating my comments in the YouTube Studio community tab. I'm still looking at a comment from like weeks ago and stuff as the most up-to-date one, even though I've responded to new comments more recent than that. So just wanted you to be aware. So if you do have fan requests in the future, again, please wait at least until after September, or maybe mid-October for any more fan requests, but I will make a note of them. But I've got a lot that I'm catching up on. But if I do get fan requests and it's important to you, send it to my realseekerministry@gmail.com, and I'll put it on the list, and I'll just get to them in order when I've got the time, and I'll one thing at a time. So you just be patient, but I will get to it. So just wanted you to be aware of that. So great. Fan request number 2. Someone asked me to cover the Great Isaiah Scroll, and they didn't give anything specific about the Great Isaiah Scroll that they wanted me to handle or address. So I'm just going to teach generally about its significance for biblical scholarship and maybe deal with the apologetics issue that was going on because of Wes Huff, based on the preservation problem that skeptics like to raise, and how the Great Isaiah Scroll has been used apologetically to say preservation problem is not so problematic. Okay, so what is the Great Isaiah Scroll? So the Great Isaiah Scroll is a scroll among many in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which the Dead Sea Scrolls are basically a collection of ancient Jewish manuscripts discovered in the Qumran caves in southern Israel, next to the Dead Sea. And these were found starting in 1947 all the way up through 1956. Now, these scrolls are incredible because they're written on parchment and papyrus, even copper with Jeremiah there. And they contain the oldest known copies or manuscripts of books from the Hebrew Bible, in other words, the Old Testament, as well as other religious texts dating from the 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD, the time of Jesus Christ. So obviously this offers invaluable insights into the history of Judaism, Christianity during its 1st century, its founding, as well as the state of the Old Testament at the time of the late Second Temple period, which is about 1,000 years earlier than our previous oldest manuscripts, which is the Masoretic text dating to 900s AD, right? 10th century AD, medieval period. So this was incredible. In total, 22 copies of the biblical book of Isaiah were found. 2 of them came from Cave 1, 18 were from Cave 4, and 1 came from Cave 5. Plus, there was an additional copy of Isaiah that was discovered south of the Qumran in a cave at Wadi Merabat. And I have the link there if you want information here. But basically, all 22 copies of Isaiah are written in ancient Hebrew and are largely consistent with what we have in our modern-day Old Testament texts. Now, all of these manuscripts were fragmentary, with the exception of the Great Isaiah Scroll, and that's why this is so special. I remember when I took my trip in 2013, I went to Jerusalem. I went to the museum, my first day in Jerusalem, literally jet-lagged and stuff like that, but I knew I wasn't going to have time the next day because we were going out for a tour of the old city and stuff like that. So I ran to the museum and I got to see the Great Isaiah Scroll with my own eyeballs. It was incredible. But what is this Great Isaiah Scroll? What's so cool about this? Well, look, this was one of the original 7 Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in 1947 and it is the largest and best preserved of all the biblical scrolls. It's the only one that is almost complete, virtually complete, the entire book of the biblical prophet Isaiah. On it, there are 54 columns containing all 66 chapters of the Hebrew version of the biblical book of Isaiah. And this dates, get this, it dates to about 125 to 150 BC, before Jesus Christ. A century and a half. Incredible. And it's amazing. It's one of the oldest of the Dead Sea Scrolls that we have. And it is, in the words of Wes Huff, virtually identical, word for word, with what we have in our modern book of Isaiah. If you want to argue from messianic prophecies or the prediction of Jesus, the Messiah's death and resurrection, aka Jesus, we have absolute proof, archaeological proof, that somehow somebody knew 100 plus years before the events actually happened, right? So skeptics are unable to say, oh, well, it was just written down after the fact. The prophecy was written down after Jesus died and rose from the dead, or was claimed to rise from the dead. No, we have absolute proof. It was written well before Jesus even existed. Yet somehow this author knew the Messiah would die and rise again. In Isaiah chapter 50, in the Isaiah 53 suffering servant messianic prophecy. So this provides a great way to establish an argument from fulfilled prophecy on that front, if you want to go down that route. And like I said, that's something I've done in one of my arguments, the vindication prediction argument. But anyways, looking at the Dead Sea Scroll, the Great Isaiah Scroll here, as I said, the translation is virtually identical to our modern Bible versions, which are based on the Masoretic text from the 900s AD during the early medieval period. Another thing just to mention, outside of the other thing is we have a second Isaiah scroll, and this largely confirms. So this was a part of the original repository of the 7 manuscripts found by the Bedouin in 1947, but this scroll reached us in very poor condition. Regrettably, all that survived was the upper portion of the last third of the biblical book of Isaiah and a few fragments of the early and middle sections. Written in a Herodian, so the period of Jewish history from 30 BC to 70 AD, written in a Hebrew script and dated to the 1st century AD, it contains Isaiah chapter 52, verses 7 to 8, all the way up to chapter 61, verse 2, and it is the best preserved of the 4 sheets found. So again, if you want to make that messianic prophecies argument, we also have, from the time the 1st century, confirmation of what the words actually said in this prophecy, written before Jesus even existed, and confirming what the Great Isaiah Scroll, in large part, what the Great Isaiah Scroll reads based on the Masoretic text. So outside of the prophecy, messianic prophecies angle, going back to the Great Isaiah Scroll. So the Great Isaiah Scroll matches the Masoretic text at minimum. So this is the estimation of Dr. John Mead, who was quoting a scholar who actually, his specialization, his PhD expertise, and the way he makes his money as a professional is by counting and cataloging the words and the differences and the variants in the manuscript at minimum. So this is a worst case scenario. The Great Isaiah Scroll is 92% word for word identical with the Masoretic text. Incredible, folks. This is amazing. And again, there are 16,932 words in the text. Now, Dr. John Mead did the counting and found that only a mere 1,870 variants between the two, the Masoretic and the Great Isaiah Scroll, occurred in all of these 17,000 words. So that is incredibly well preserved. But the 92% is actually way too low. It's actually much closer to maybe 99%, 97, 99%, depending on how you count the variants, because most of these variants are totally irrelevant. They're things like spelling errors, which in the ancient world, they weren't formal about spelling. You could swap words, or you could swap letters, or you didn't have to put an S. Maybe someone forgot to put one letter down as a scribal error or something like that. These are totally irrelevant. We know that it's saying the exact same thing that all the other manuscripts are saying. So these are variants, but they're not errors. They're not textual variants. Something that would be meaningful in the sense of changing the propositional content or meaning of the text and what the text is saying. So we have this question: how many are actually meaningful textual variants? We have to do a qualitative assessment of the variants, not as the atheists and skeptics do, a mindless, dumb, stupid quantitative measure of the differences in variants. Yeah, Dr. John Mead in the video I'll play a clip from goes over all of these various irrelevant quantitative variants and differences, which has zero significance or impact in terms of changing the qualitative meaning of the text itself.
Scholars are going to disagree. I think we can be reasonably certain of the reconstruction I just laid out, that again, Barthélemy, Williamson, several others have seen. And again, Ulrich only works really, he tried to put 2:9b to 10 in like kind of a stream of several other examples like this, and said, see, the book of Isaiah is developing, right, in the 2nd century BC. But I just thought once Drew Longacre cut out from under him all those other examples due to defective exemplar, right? Again, not compositional reasons, but just defective copies. There's really no leg to stand on when you come to 2:9b to 10, because that has to now be explained in a very different way.
And I think there's reasonable explanations in terms of that. You know, you have 10 scholars in a room, you have 12 different opinions.
Yeah,
So
that's right. That's right.
There's always,
because you always have early and later, right? Scholars like, arguing against themselves, right? Later on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Sean McDowell. And Anthony wrote a whole doctoral dissertation on these so-called non-aligned texts, that is, these Dead Sea Scrolls that didn't align with the Masoretic text. And he sort of went one by one. The Great Isaiah Scroll was actually a decent portion of that thesis. And that video is worth watching as well, because when he talks in terms of statistics, I mean, he's really done that work. And so he has some good comments there on the global situation.
And many people think of the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the first examples they go to is the Great Isaiah Scroll. So what is that find? Why is it so important?
Yeah, so the Great Isaiah Scroll is very, very popular, and it's popular for good reason. First of all, like the rest of this text, it's ancient. It dates to the 2nd century BC, and so it's old. That's what makes it popular. Also, the timing of the discovery, it was one of the first texts discovered. Okay. So we had other texts discovered as well. We actually had another copy of Isaiah. Scholars call this 1Q Isaiah B. 1Q just means the first cave, and it was the second text of Isaiah discovered. That was discovered as well. We also had like a commentary of Habakkuk, but 1Q Isaiah A stole the show because it includes the entire text of Isaiah. So you have the beginning, you have the end. It has some holes in it. The bottom is a little damaged. There's a few holes in between. The very end of the text kind of wore out, so it had to be re-inked. You had to write the text again with ink again. But by and large, it's completely there. So it's popular because it's ancient. It's popular because it's actually a scroll. And let's make that clear. Most of our texts aren't scrolls, they're fragments. So really, it would be more popular to call these the Dead Sea fragments and not the Dead Sea Scrolls. But 1Q Isaiah is a scroll. And the reason why it was preserved so well is that the story goes, they found it in a jar. So, it was almost kind of sealed in this time capsule, so to say. And so, it's popular because of its timing, its age. It's popular because it includes the entire book of Isaiah. It's also popular because it's Isaiah. I mean, most people don't know much about Joel and Obadiah, but people know about Isaiah. And it was the same at Qumran. You know, we have about 20 copies of Isaiah texts in Qumran. We have about 5 commentaries, and then we have a few little works that are kind of just discussing the book of Isaiah. So Isaiah was popular at Qumran. You know, it's also its popularity is also evident in the New Testament. I mean, the New Testament quotes, echoes, or alludes to Isaiah quite a bit. And if you just go into like a seminary library, there's a lot more books on Isaiah than there are on, again, Joel or Habakkuk. So I think its popularity is also due to the fact that it's the book of Isaiah. You know, another reason that makes it so popular is when it was first discovered, it was pretty much unanimous that, wow, this text demonstrates the antiquity of the Masoretic text. That was basically the consensus view. And so its popularity also is due to that fact. It by and large demonstrates that the Masoretic text, the canonical text for Jews and Christians, that is best preserved in medieval manuscripts. That's like the Aleppo Codex, a text from 930 AD, Codex Leningrad from 1008 AD. Those were the best texts we have preserving the Masoretic tradition. And now we have 1Q Isaiah A, a text that dates to roughly 150 BC. And it's demonstrating the antiquity of the Masoretic text. So this is a text that's 1,200 years older.
The remarkable nature of the textual transmission and the proximity between what we had and then what we found is just something that Christian apologists are making up, right? So it's worth just looking at scholarly reactions to the Dead Sea Scrolls. We can go all the way back to the 1950s as they're first being studied. Miller Burroughs was an early authority on the Dead Sea Scrolls and a professor at Yale Divinity School. His conclusion was, it is a matter of wonder that through something like 1,000 years, the text underwent so little alteration. As I said in my first article on the scroll, herein lies its chief importance, supporting the fidelity of the Masoretic tradition. This is not an evangelical apologist. Here's how David Friedman, another Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, spoke of Burroughs' early work. You can read that quote on the screen. Now, as the decades have rolled forward, the picture definitely has, in some respects, gotten more complicated. These early studies didn't have access to all the Isaiah texts in the various caves. They didn't have access to digitized forms of the text that allow for electronic searches. So in a more recent work, Eugene Ulrich, who's kind of a chief authority on these questions, and definitely not an evangelical apologist, notes, so he'll talk about, there's slightly more variance, for example, in 1Q Isaiah B than the earlier reports, but it's still remarkably close to the Masoretic text. And the idea that the discovery of these scrolls is a remarkable confirmation of the prior textual transmission is still frequently observed in the scholarship. Here's how Ellis Brotzman put it. While there are many small differences between the Masoretic text and the various Qumran documents, the overall agreement between them is striking. The Qumran scrolls, while being much earlier than the Masoretic text, generally supported the fidelity with which the Masoretic text was copied. He's writing that in the 90s, and in context, he's agreeing explicitly with Burroughs' early assessment, and he ties this claim specifically to the book of Isaiah. Even Ulrich can speak of the impact of the Dead Sea Scrolls as showing that the traditional Hebrew Bible has been amazingly accurately preserved. And he speaks about the scribes doing a first-rate job.
Okay, so as you can see, the actual PhD scholars, as opposed to hyper online radical skeptics, say, yeah, the Great Isaiah Scroll, exactly like what we have with the Hebrew Bible copy of Isaiah in the Masoretic text, which is the basis for all of our modern Old Testaments today that we read in English. So, yeah, when it comes to textual variants, there's nothing to worry about. The Isaiah scroll is 99.999%, the exact same as what we have. Again, somewhere in the high 90% percentile mark range. At worst, it's 92% the same if you count all the variants, quantitatively speaking, spelling errors, minor little errors that don't affect the meaning of the text in any way, things that are totally irrelevant. But on the qualitative level, the text of Isaiah is exactly the same, according to the scholars, as was written by Isaiah himself 2,700 years ago, and that we have actual proof from the time of Jesus and the preceding couple of centuries. Okay, so the third fan request was to deal with all the hoopla around Cicero Moraes and his recent paper published now in Archaeometry, the journal from Oxford University, but which was published over a year ago, or maybe a couple of years ago, in a different paper that I guess that was maybe a preprint or something like that. But yeah, I responded to that and made a video on it earlier this last year in 2024, refuting Cicero Moraes and stuff like that, and reading the various opinions from Pro-Shroud experts, kind of responding to his claims. But so someone asked me about it again. So I just want to give a quick reply. So first of all, I sent a Gmail email to Cicero himself, because I actually spoke with Cicero back in 2024 before his paper and his claims got so famous and everyone was talking about it. And I've invited him to come on my show. I invited him before to come on and do a debate, but due to language issues, he declined to do that. But I've reached out to him again and invited him to do a straightforward interview so that if he agrees, I can send him the questions in advance, and hopefully we can get clarity from the primary source as to what his new paper proves and doesn't prove. But just for this show, in terms of the fan request, just by way of a very quick response, again, I've already done a show on Cicero Moraes, as you can see here in my video, refuting Cicero Moraes' 3D objection to the Shroud's authenticity, which I posted up last year, 7 months ago, before he got famous and stuff like that, on my Real Seekers YouTube channel. But the reason I just want to give a quick update here. So first of all, I spoke to Cicero Moraes about his thing in person. So I just want to give his own take, where he admits that his results in this paper are limited. So the first thing to say here is, here's using a shallow bas-relief. The world's experts, Jackson, Jumper, and Erskine, did extensive scientific experiments using a shallow bas-relief. And these were their conclusions, that it would utterly fail to reproduce the Shroud's three-dimensionality and vertical columnation. So here's what they say. Three-dimensionality. A shallow bas-relief image formation method is capable of accounting for the Shroud's image cloth body distance correlation, generally speaking. However, experiments conducted by Jackson, Jumper, and Erskine led to the conclusion that the bas-relief would need to be very shallow. Giulio Fonte, on the other hand, has, in his book, The Shroud of Turin Optical Research, discussed the luminance analysis of Delfino's bas-relief image as compared to the Shroud. Fonte's analysis appears to lead to the conclusion that the Shroud's three-dimensional image would be subtly but obviously different than a bas-relief three-dimensional VPA rendering. On the wrapping distortions, this is specifically the vertically mapped wrapping distortions that Cicero is addressing in his paper, claiming that the bas-relief is much better than a direct contact. Now, it says this, inconsistent. To achieve an image, the cloth must come into contact with the bas-relief. The Shroud wrapping distortions are subtle. To achieve the same distortions with a bas-relief, a separate bas-relief would have to be used for the frontal image and a second bas-relief for the dorsal image. Dr. Jackson noted that a shallow bas-relief, like the one Cicero Moraes talks about, would appear to just complicate reproducing the wrapping distortions found on the Shroud, where the wrapping distortions are consistent with an actual human body and a vertical projection of the body image. We hold that it is an inconsistency that an artist would have anticipated this requirement and then been able to execute it with the realism observed on the Shroud with a contact-dependent method such as the bas-relief. So this is basically just proving that it's scientifically impossible for using an artistic mechanism like the shallow bas-relief to fully and properly reproduce or adequately duplicate the shroud's vertically mapped wrapping distortions. Again, all Cicero proves is that it wasn't formed naturally through direct contact. That creates very wide lateral distortions, such as this mask of Agamemnon effect, or this wraparound distortion effect. That's true. And a shallow bas-relief performs much better and looks much more normal and narrower, like the shroud images, like a real human body. But the point here is that scientifically, there would still be subtle and obvious distant differences and some lateral distortions evident on the images produced by a shallow bas-relief, like Cicero calculates using his in his paper, or postulates in his paper, versus what we actually see with the Shroud of Turin. In other words, the bas-relief cannot explain the vertical mapping of the Shroud of Turin. And I raised this objection myself to Cicero Moraes, who was kind enough to, again, I will admit, in my video, I did make some faulty assumptions about Cicero and made some false statements about him and stuff like that, which he corrected in the comments and was kind enough to overlook. And so I'm grateful that he accepted my apology on that front, and that he was willing to just, let's get back into the substance. And during our conversation, I raised this substantive objection that, look, yes, the shallow bas-relief produces better images relative to images produced through natural direct contact. But that's been known for decades. Everybody knows that. And the credible Pro-Shroud STIRP scientists have known that. That's why they posit vertically collimated radiation charged particles, like Bob Rucker in his radiation hypothesis, or other people like Mark Antonacci and others, for example, John Jackson. So this in no way disproves that the shroud wrapped the corpse of Jesus, and then the images were produced miraculously in a way that would produce vertically mapped images and stuff like that. And here's the thing, Cicero himself admits this. So this is the new part. I want you to see Cicero's, in his own words, admitting this. Okay, so I said, also, why don't you clarify that even your shallow bas-relief also produces subtle lateral distortions, even if not as pronounced as had it wrapped a full 3D body or statue, that make it inconsistent with the images we see on the shroud as well. And Cicero got back to me on that. In addition, I am aware of some studies, yes, but both Mark Rivera and other critics of my work, I have no problem with criticism, are insisting on trying to include elements that I did not address. His paper omits to mention the credible Pro-Shroud scientists and their radiation theories, which already account and have no problem accounting for the shroud's images, yes, via supernatural, miraculous mechanisms, admitted, of course, that's what we're arguing for. We're arguing it's a supernatural miracle. They were formed miraculously at the time of the resurrection. Naturally, it's impossible to explain them. And so we already knew that the direct contact would fail. And the bas-relief, the shallow bas-relief, performs much better than natural direct contact. But it's not good enough. It's close, but no cigar in terms of the shallow bas-relief. And here is Cicero admitting this. He admits, look, my paper didn't address what the Pro-Shroud scientists like Bob Rucker or radiation theorists Mark Antonacci, Arthur Lind, or John Jackson, my paper doesn't deal with those people who already know about this issue and have accounted for it. The problem that it's actually not exactly duplicating the shroud images, his paper is not trying to argue that. He knows that the shallow bas-relief fails because there are subtle lateral distortions which are obvious and evident to every scientist. Maybe not a layman just looking with their little eyeballs online, like Jordan on Reason to Doubt, or other people who just go, well, it looks good enough to me, I guess he's reproduced it. No, Cicero's saying horse trash. The shallow bas-relief will always produce subtle less pronounced lateral distortions, which means it utterly fails to reproduce the shroud images, which don't have those subtle lateral distortions, right? So the shroud images, they're not due to natural direct contact. They don't have major wraparound distortion, lateral distortion effects. That's clear. They also don't have these subtle lateral distortions we would get from using a shallow bas-relief. Both natural theories, these direct contact naturally, and the artistic theory using a shallow bas-relief, are hereby falsified. And Cicero's admitting that. His paper wasn't aiming to get into that issue. So he says, how can I comment on something I did not write about? I politely explained this to everyone, but it was no use. It was like I was talking to a wall. My text, the article I wrote, is very clear, but it seems that no one read it. He knows that the shallow bas-relief has problems with it too and can't explain the shroud. It's not consistent with the vertical mapping of the Shroud of Turin's body images, and he knows that, but that's not a part of his peer-reviewed paper. He's strictly focused on natural direct contact and the wrapping majorly pronounced distortions resulting from that, and how a shallow bas-relief produces much better images with less of these wraparound distortion effects, making the images wider than a normal human corpse. But they're still not good enough compared to the Shroud of Turin. Okay, so a fan reached out asking me, saying very sincerely that their Christian faith is in large part due to Eucharistic miracles, but out of giving them due credit, they are also a real seeker, and they watched my shows on the Eucharistic miracles and found it troubling. It caused them to question their faith, and not their faith, but their belief in these Eucharistic miracles at the very least. And they asked me to look into two Eucharistic miracles, one from Sokolka, Poland in 2008. So this is a miracle from their hometown. And the second, the new Indian miracle, whereby a face of Jesus actually showed up on some of the Eucharistic bread in front of a large audience and stuff like that. And it was claimed to be a miracle. Okay, so let's first look at the 2008 Sokolka Poland miracle, because I've done shows on that with the experts, Dr. Kelly Kierce and skeptic Kevin Non-Tradicath, as well as a pro-Eucharistic miracle person Matt, who works with Dr. Franco Serafini. So let's first play the clip from my previous show, giving what is the Sokolka 2008 Eucharistic miracle about?
Okay, so now let me talk to you about Sokolka. Sokolka is another independent Eucharistic miracle that occurred in Poland on October 12th, 2008. So this was during a Mass, 8:30 Mass in the morning in the Church of St. Anthony of Padua with Father Filip Zadrowski, who dropped a host without noticing. And he picked it up, but since it was dirty, he followed the standard procedure in the Catholic Church and placed it in a bowl of water, and then in the tabernacle to wait until it dissolved. But when they came back a week later on Sunday, October 19th at 8 a.m., the sacristan Julian Dubowska opened the tabernacle and found that the host was partially covered by a red-colored by a red substance, a coagulum-like substance. And so Sister Julia immediately called the priest in charge of the church, and the bishop was quickly informed and asked for the host to be secured. On January 7, 2009, so just a few months later, at the bishop's request, the host was removed from the white linen for further examination. And so you can see that the host was put on this cloth, the white cloth, and they took it off this white cloth and sent it to two experts. So these two experts come from the Białystok University, and they were chosen to perform the examination. First, we have Stanislaw Sulowski, who is a renowned professor from the Department of General Pathomorphology. He has 286 publications recognized by PubMed, and he is an expert in immunohistochemistry of neoplastic tissues. Maria Zobaniak-Lotowska from the Department of Medical Pathomorphology also has 115 scientific publications on PubMed, and her main expertise lies in hepatology and pediatric gastroenterology. So we have two worldwide experts who knew that it came from a consecrated host because she was there when they took it from the host, but the professor Stanislas Sulowski does not know anything of that, so he's doing totally a blind testing. And so both the professor Stanislas Sulowski does not know anything of that, so he's doing totally a blind testing. And so both examined it independently in different rooms, and so they both came with the same conclusion, that it is heart muscle, or at least a living organic structure that mostly resembles heart tissue, heart muscle. And they found that the fibers show centrally placed nuclei with segments and delicate microfibrillar formations with disintegration that showed a sign of suffering or damage. So a suffering myocardic tissue. And especially it was impossible to fake. So the heart muscle fibers and the substance of the host were intrinsically intertwined. So you can see on the pictures on the screen here that the degree of microscopic interpenetration cannot be manufactured by any kind of human instruments, because you have the substance of the host that is intrinsically linked to the myocardic tissue. And so you cannot make these two linked with human instruments. So that's what convinced Dr. Lotowska that it was supernatural. So that's
Sokolka. Yeah, Kevin, obviously I'll let you give your take on this, but the part again that I'm most interested in, this impossible to fake thing, and you kind of briefly mentioned this before, but what is your response to this penetration? I know you kind of objected to it, that it's not proven and we have no peer review, we have none of this stuff, but Matt responded by saying, well, we do have this picture. How do you explain this observation where it looks like the tissue is intertwined with the blood?
To me, that looks like fungus that's eating the bread. that's just what it looks like to me. Mm-hmm. And this like inextricable, this inextricable intertwining to me seems like it's just like a really poetic way of saying, like, yeah, like the two substances are next to each other. That doesn't look like muscle tissue to me, just like looking at a picture. Now, obviously you'd want to look at it under a slide. But like, so here's where I will agree with Matthew. And I think that when Matthew talks about like impossible to fake, this is what he's imagining. So you have, the host, the Eucharist right here, and then somebody takes human heart tissue and they like place it on top and they smush it around and they smush it inside. And then they're like, oh, look, it's turning into heart tissue. Like that would be obvious. I agree. And I do not think that is what happened here. I do not think that anybody faked by trying to smush real human heart tissue in there. I don't think it's human heart tissue at all. I think it's fungus. I think the fungus is eating the bread. And that looks like fungus eating the bread to me. So
the reason why the fungus is so big is like this all used to be part of the bread, but it got all eaten up, and it's in the process of finishing it off.
Yeah. And I mean, it might have grown past the bread too. I'm not saying that the host was that big, but I think that it ate the bread. Like that's what is happening in these cases. Like the fungus is growing on top of the bread because the bread is a food source.
Gotcha. Do you know, have there been any micro photographs of fungi eating something like bread where like we can see that it does kind of look similar to this level of intertwining? Or
I mean, I guess I don't know of any, but we could like people redo these experiments at home all the time. Dr. Kirst did, my friend Skeptasmic did, and like this is what they look like. We just would have to take it and then dry it out and put it on a piece of bread. I mean, put it on a piece of cloth, and then we could take a picture of it. So like we could do that experiment like ourselves at home, and I think we should. I think that'd be cool. Dr. Kirst has pictures of his at-home Eucharistic miracle experiments that you can look at in his paper. He's got pictures of them. They don't look like that because he wasn't showing you it dried off on a cloth. He was showing you the still wet one, like in the bowl. But we could just dry it off and then take another picture. And then there is another point that I would like to make about this. And I think that focusing on the scientist instead of on the science is always a sure sign that something sketchy is going on. Whenever there's like a quack who wants to sell you his snake oil, he's going to talk about how I was a doctor for 20 years and now I'm selling my own supplement. And that's why you should, I don't care how long you were a scientist, dude. I care about the process of, I care about the scientific process. I care about peer review. I don't want to know who the scientists are, frankly. I want to send these samples to labs like PPD Central Lab, labs like ICON, like Thermo Fisher, like Q2, like IQVIA, like LabCorp. There's so many of these labs that we could, and these are all just the ones in the US, you know, and none of these occurred in the US. But there's plenty of labs in Europe. There's plenty of labs in South America. And often these samples were sent to the US. So like that first lab for the Buenos Aires case was in the US, the one that said no known morphology. So I find the weird, like, look at this scientist, look how qualified they are, and this is what they said. To me, this is just simply not how science is done, and it kind of raises my skeptic hairs rise on end whenever people start talking about individual scientists instead of the scientific process, instead of the assay, right? The platform that a certain assay was run on or something. Like, respectfully, I'm sure that Professor Lotowska is super qualified, I'm sure. But I also know that she was working on canonization cases. So she was a friend of the bishop. So like, okay, why do we pick her? You know? And problem number 3 is that the Department of Medical Pathology at the Medical University of Bialystok really seems to be distancing itself from this work done by these two scientists. On the screen next to me, you will see an article in Polish that, again, I'm going to translate into English. Thank you, Google Translate. The medical university officially disassociates itself from the results of these studies and emphasizes that the university does not endorse them. This is the position of the rector of the university, which a spokesperson of the university presents in the latest issue of the journal Medic Bialystok, published at the university. On Thursday, the position was made available to this Polish news organization. We did not do it as a university, the spokesman told PAP, and added that the research was carried out. Now, this word is translated as illegally, but I doubt it means illegally. It probably just means without permission, quietly, and outside of the official route. It took place in the academic department of pathomorphological diagnostics, but the university did not have any order to perform these tests. The study was also not registered anywhere. Please do not attribute the diagnosis to any specific faculty operating in the institution, wrote the spokesperson for the university. The spokesperson said that he respects the belief of his colleagues about the miracle transforming into a host, into the fragments of heart muscle, but he points out, as a believer and at the same time as a doubting person, that he has doubts. And he said that he doesn't question the diagnosis of his colleagues, although they were, quote, characterized by an emotional approach to the faith. They are experienced pathologists, so it is likely that the tissue that they studied did come from heart muscle, but the question is whose heart, writes the spokesperson. He emphasizes that a histopathological examination would not even give an answer here, and the doubts would be dispelled through a genetic and molecular examination. The spokesperson believes that the colleagues who undertook the diagnosis made a school error in that they tried to combine theology with biology. The spokesperson also said that the school proposed that they could conduct official research on the tissue, but the archdiocese refused, explaining that the matter required calm. The spokesperson said that there were offers of tests from other experienced specialists at other medical centers as well. The Archbishop said, "We are dealing with an extremely subtle manner. If we confess that this is the body of Christ, we cannot just cut it into pieces and test it. We must be careful with a kind of fear." If you're asking me what you think I think happened. My only real answer to you is I don't know. I never know. The science is never conclusive enough in these Eucharistic miracles. But I can hazard a guess, noting that this is really, really a tentative guess and that I would change my opinion on this in a split second if information was proposed that that made this opinion look, not super viable. But if you recall, I've brought up, particularly at Buenos Aires and Tixla, that this could be a case of bacteria. There's a certain kind of bacteria that gives off a red pigment that looks a lot like kind of decaying flesh. This kind of bacteria can grow on bread, particularly moist bread. So if you have bread dissolving in water and that bacteria is able to get in there, this seems like a fairly likely thing that might happen.
Okay, so what is my take on this miracle? Well, given the only empirical evidence we have, nothing was published in peer-reviewed literature. No empirical evidence was published at all, even in the popular level literature, apart from this one picture. I'm just going to judge this. This can be equally probable, if not is more equally probable, let's say, to my eyes, because I'm not an expert. It's just bread being eaten by a red fungus. I have no way to know. I'm just agnostic on this. And it looks comparable to Dr. Kelly Kierce's findings, where we know it's a red-producing blood-like fungus eating bread, just at a higher magnification than we get here. They look the same in terms of the intertwining. Right? So here it is. Here on the left. Here's Dr. Kelly Kierce's experiment. You can see the intertwining. The blood's going up into the fibers. We got the black spots here, the black spot there, stuff like that. So again, this is a matter of, this looks a little bit different because it's a higher magnification with the where it's the fungus is eating the bread, whereas this is on linen and it's at a lower degree of magnification. So that's why there's slight differences. But in terms of the intertwining aspect, this looks pretty intertwined on in terms of my observation. So yeah, there's nothing about the empirical evidence which can prove a Eucharistic miracle. So that leaves us with the testimonial evidence, supposedly independent testimony from two qualified scientists, and they are indeed qualified. What do I make of the testimonial evidence then? I find it problematic that one of the scientists is a well-known person who works in Catholic canonization and stuff like that. That's a little suspicious. And they're both devout Catholics working at the same university in the same department or same area, so they would be associates, which could suggest some kind of collusion or conspiracy to say that they got precisely the same results. Now, on that front, that is just suspicions for me. So I would say I'm agnostic on the testimonial evidence here. I don't think it pushes me up, despite the fact that they both have credentials. There is this provable motivation or bias that they have, plus their association, and the fact that they went undercover and stuff like that. It was an unofficial thing against the university, raises suspicions. Now, I'm not going to disbelieve on that basis. I think Kevin the skeptic goes too far to say, therefore it probably is a conspiracy, or therefore it probably is something shady going on. I would remain agnostic there. It's just something that raises suspicions. But again, despite those facts, it all depends on what the evidence is. Now, here's why I would say I actually disbelieve. I think this is probably a fungus and probably provably not a miracle in the case of Sokolka. It's due to what the university was saying, right? So when the university is saying, look, the tests themselves that were done are inconclusive. You could not tell that it was heart tissue, again, from the experts themselves, from this medical university and bile stock. And they're saying the histopathological examination will not give you an answer on this front. It will not tell you what the scientists are saying. So I have contradictory testimony from another qualified expert representing the university proper, saying we want nothing to do with these results. We don't endorse them. And in fact, the tests, the claims that they're making are not provable given the methodology that they used. And further, they offered, we are willing to do more testing that will be conclusive and will prove your claim or disprove it through genetic and molecular examination. And once that came up, no, we're not going to test it. We need to calm down. No, we're not going to let you do that. And we have the fact that the issue of the tests that were done or the observations that were made, according to at least one qualified expert, would have been inconclusive, and you could not reach the conclusions that these two scientists with a proven bias and motivation to conspire in this way and who just happen to see the exact same thing as each other. It just smells not right to me. So I would say I'm about 70 to 75% convinced. The Sokolka case is just a case of red fungi eating the bread. It's not a Eucharistic miracle. I would actually make the claim on a balance of probabilities that this is a fake. It's not really a Eucharistic miracle. It's just explained naturally. Sorry to disappoint you. For what it's worth, though, for the fan who requested this, I will admit that there are other cases, such as Buenos Aires, where the empirical evidence is stronger and better, and it's not as easy to dismiss, and where I don't feel warranted in necessarily saying I actively disbelieve that these are miracles. I remain sort of agnostic. I don't believe nor disbelieve at this moment and stuff. And there are some other cases of Eucharistic miracles, given my knowledge of Frederick T. Zugby and this interesting problem that he saw that he claimed as an eyewitness to have seen things, and I believe him on that. I believe his testimony on that front. I saw his letter. It's undeniable, with white blood cells and all that stuff that could not be explainable unless it was from my real heart tissue and stuff like that. But it had to be within 4 hours, otherwise, or something like that, a short period of hours. So if it was fraud, they, on a period of hours, 3 to 4 hours, they had to find some fake heart tissue and contaminate the sample, put that into the sample, and then give it to Frederick T. Zugby. I suppose that could have happened. That's possible. That's even plausible. But it's just the fact that they had to do that within time scale makes it slightly unlikely. Now, on the other end with that, there are counters against that, where Zugby says that the tissue has certain features that are inconsistent with what Jesus went through in the Gospels. And that, again, also suggests, okay, maybe there is fraud going on here, or maybe it's a miracle having nothing to do with Jesus or something like that. Maybe it's a trick from Satan, a supernatural act of Satan or something like that. But anyways, that's on the Buenos Aires case. I just wanted to state, I think that case is a empirically stronger case than the Sokolka thing. I actively disbelieve this. I think fungus is more probable in this specific instance as an explanation, and the evidence, the testimonial and the empirical evidence given, which is just that one picture, nothing else was given. I don't find that convincing. So I hope that helps. I'm sorry to disappoint, but let's move on to the latest Eucharistic miracle, something I've never covered on the show before. This Indian miracle that was just accepted from 12 years or 13 years ago, whereby Jesus's face appeared on the Eucharistic bread, supposedly in front of an audience. What do I make of that? This is the most recent miracle that the Vatican just accepted after 12 to 13 years of study, and has officially accepted now as an official miracle of the Roman Catholic Church. So what is this miracle about? As you can see, here's the Eucharistic bread, and you see a miraculous image of Jesus Christ's face. Now, basically, what's the story behind this? So, on November 15th, 2013, in a Indian village called Villa Kannur, in southern India, something extraordinary occurred during the celebration of the Holy Eucharist. The presiding celebrant noticed a black dot on the consecrated host. Moments later, a human face appeared on the host. Perplexed, the priest beckoned the sacristan, who also confirmed that the picture of the face, believed to be the face of Jesus, had formed on the host. The congregation, not realizing what was going on at the altar, assumed that the priest was experiencing some physical difficulty and that the sacristan had been called for help. So here's the first thing by way of assessment. Nobody but the priest witnessed this supposed miracle. It was only the priest and the priest alone who saw a supposed black dot and then moments later transformed into the human face that they believed was Jesus. He called the sacristan did not see the miracle. He only saw the face after the fact. And none of the crowd, so this was not a miracle seen by the masses. It didn't transform in front of everybody's eyes. That they only saw the face after the fact, because after Mass, the priest revealed the miracle and the phenomenon to the faithful. And then the word spread like wildfire. Thousands gathered to witness what many called a miracle. And after this, because of the matters, the host was ultimately removed from the local parish and safely kept elsewhere. And it was later submitted for scientific investigation. Interesting. Just this year, in 2025, after all this time, the Vatican has now officially recognized it as a Eucharistic miracle and granted permission for public veneration of the host. And here's the picture of the face. Here's the official website with the Eucharistic bread. You can see the face more clearly. And let's just play the video so you can see it from the official website of the church that has this miracle happening.
First time in the 2000-year history of the Holy Catholic Church, the holy face of Jesus has appeared during the Holy Eucharist. Beyond the image imprinted on Veronica's veil during Jesus' earthly life, and beyond the imprint on the holy shroud that once covered his physical body, his holy face has now appeared on the sacred host itself, 2 millennia later. The significance of this miraculous event is beyond the grasp of words. Just as Simeon once beheld the holy face with his own eyes, we too are now granted the grace to witness it in our time. This is the greatest blessing of living in this era. The official proclamation of this great miracle that took place in Lakanau will be made by the Apostolic Nuncio to India, Archbishop Leopoldo Giurelli, on May 31st, 2025. Let us prepare ourselves in prayer and devotion and enthrone the holy face of Jesus in our hearts as we participate in this historic and sacred moment.
Okay, so that is the official video from the King Church in this village, the Archdiocese of Tellicherry, and this village, Villa Kannur in India. Okay, so what do I say by assessment? So first thing, let's just pretend it is a miracle. Right away, I have problems with this. So this video mentions the Shroud of Turin, the Veil of Veronica. We know that the Veil of Veronica is provably not real. It showed as a historian, Pro-Shroud Christian historian Jack Marquardt explained, it shows up in between the 8th and 10th century in Italy, with no earlier provenance or provable provenance in the East, unlike other images of Jesus, such as the not made with human hands image of God incarnate, dating back from the 6th century to the city of Antioch, and before that, dating all the way back to Jerusalem in 30 AD. But first thing I want to say is this image is totally incomparable to the Shroud of Turin image, which we know provably is a miraculous image of Christ. And that discrepancy could be problematic. Now, first, let me just say one thing. I'm consistent in that, remember, I say the dating of an object is irrelevant, right? So look, God is perfectly able to do a miraculous image and use that as a religion authenticating event, and or in this case, as a denomination authenticating, a Roman Catholic authenticating event, or something like that, possibly, right? So I don't dismiss that on that basis. But the first thing is, this is not the face of Jesus. It contradicts the face on the Shroud of Turin. Those are two different types of people. Jesus didn't have two faces. He only had one. And since I know for a fact the Shroud of Turin is an authentic depiction of Jesus and what he looked like, this must be a fake. Now, what might be a theological response? Am I going to dismiss this on that basis alone? Actually, no, because I think it's possible that God is permitted to make miraculous images of Jesus that are historically inaccurate. So Jesus didn't look like this, but which reflect what the audience thinks about Jesus. And it's for this reason I don't reject the Shroud, even though the objection by Shroud skeptics is incorrect, that the Shroud Man is a medieval depiction of Jesus. That's total bunk. Ethnologists and scholars have proven, no, he reflects a first century Jew, actually, is what he looks like. But let's, for the sake of argument, if the Shroud skeptics were right, and it was a white European medieval, blue hair, blonde hair and blue eyes, Jesus, I wouldn't necessarily, we still have the same evidence it's a miracle. God made a miraculous image that the medieval Europeans would have accepted. So I don't dismiss that. And in this same way, even though this is not the same as the Shroud, it may still be a provably miraculous image, which in the context we know is meant to represent the face of Jesus, or at least you can make that argument. And if so, it's still on the table that maybe this is a religion or perhaps a Roman Catholic sect authenticating miracle. So just because there are differences between this and the Shroud, that's a note of caution. But I'm not going to dismiss that this could still be a miracle, because God can perform these miraculous images. It just depends on the evidence. Now, here's something that I am a little bit skeptical about here, because I would expect, given the popularity of the Shroud at this time and the evidence, I do think you might say, well, we would probably expect it to resemble the Shroud Man's face. Look, even these guys in India, they're well familiar with the Shroud. They're comparing this image to the Veil of Veronica and to the Shroud of Turin. So you might argue theologically, we would expect God to make this miraculous image resemble this face on the Shroud Man. It wouldn't be markedly distinct and different from it. You might argue that's a little bit weird there. So that's a note of skepticism. Secondly, it looks clearly artistic. It has definable borders. It doesn't look like the way God creates miraculous images that are, quote unquote, not made with human hands, right? The Shroud images are image diffuse. They don't have definable borders or edges like artistic depictions. This clearly does. This image is very consistent with artistically created images. There are clear definable borders, stuff like that. So you might, on a theological level, argue, well, this is inconsistent with God's MO for creating images. Again, there are comebacks to this. You could say, yeah, but God had reason to make this image differently from the Shroud images and stuff like that. There's angles for debate there, but I'm just saying these are theological reasons. Even granting that this is a miraculous image, why I would say, well, I don't know that this is a religion authenticating miracle or a Roman Catholic authenticating miracle per se, of any sort. It could be a supernatural image from Satan as a trick or something like that. And it doesn't, there are certain theological issues that would need to be explained. Let's just put it that way. So these are some points of skepticism. The third and final theological thing is, look, this doesn't fit the MO of all the other Eucharistic miracles, in that this in no way proves transubstantiation. Apart from the fact that it takes place within the context of the Holy Eucharist, and according to the testimony, it transformed at the moment it became consecrated. I'm not sure. That's a little bit more of a vague context. It's not really sufficiently attached, I would argue, to a religion authenticating context here, or to a Roman Catholic or a denomination, a transubstantiation authenticating context necessarily. An image of Jesus, that doesn't fit his MO. Whereas the previous Eucharistic miracles, where it transforms into real body and blood of Jesus, and is provably that fits the transubstantiation thing, and would rule out more symbolic views or spiritual presence views that Protestants have. For example, again, I don't think it's good enough to, Eastern Orthodox, maybe it's a miracle for Eastern Orthodoxy. The fact that it takes place within a Catholic service is not good enough, because there are supernatural miracles that take place in Protestant churches as well as Eastern Orthodox churches and stuff like that. So certain types of miracles, I'm not sure that they take place within a religion authenticating context. And this would seem to qualify. It's too vague compared to, and in this case, it's even worse than the traditional Eucharistic miracles, which at the very least would seem to imply that transubstantiation is true. This doesn't necessarily do that. It's still bread in there. There is no blood. Where are all the blood stains? Shouldn't there be blood on the face composed of real blood? And the bread isn't becoming heart tissue or flesh or anything like that. It's just a picture that looks like an artistic image of some sort, a man-made image almost, has supposedly shown up on it. So those are my theological points here. Next, is this actually a miracle or not? I'm agnostic on the issue. It all depends on the evidence, and we have zero. I looked everywhere for the evidence. So in the first place, we don't have testimony, mass testimony, or multiple independent testimony of the miracle. Like I said, only the priest of this church supposedly testifies to witnessing the miracle itself, from a black dot transformed into this face. Secondly, why is so the other one, the sacristan who comes in, he didn't witness it. He just saw the face after the fact, and the entire crowd in the masses didn't witness it. They were told, hey, this is a miracle. You didn't see it, but trust me, I saw it. So this face, it's a miracle, guys. And then they went, wow, and went up and stuff. None of them witnessed, except for one person, the transformation from black dot to face. What do you do with the testimony of one person to a miracle like that? Well, I have no reason to trust this guy. For all I know, he's lying. He's definitely profited. The church has profited from a bunch of pilgrims coming to see this thing and all this stuff. So there is ample motivation for him to lie and make this whole thing up, and to engage in a magic trick to make this image or something like that. But again, I have no reason to suspect that he is lying or doing anything like that. I just have zero evidence on the credibility of this one person's testimony, so I can't decide on that basis. I do think it's suspicious. Why was there a black dot there to begin with? Like, isn't the Eucharist just supposed to be plain? But who knows? I don't know. What was the black dot? Was it some kind of weird ink thing that he could have, there's no reason for me to suspect this could be a magic trick. a fraud, a fake, just like the sorcerer in Acts and stuff, and just like the people, Simon tricking people with magic tricks. These are easy to perform. To make an image like this, I bet you a million magicians could say, "Oh yeah, that's easy. I could do that, no problem, in a blink of an eye." How am I going to know what the truth is? I'm still agnostic. Well, that's where we get to this part that they say there was a scientific investigation. Great. That's what I care about, right? I decided that the shroud images were miraculous based on Sturp's credible, peer-reviewed scientific studies of the shroud proving the properties of the image. Maybe there's been allegedly there's been a scientific investigation and study into this image. Okay, is it superficial? Is it supernaturally uniform? Does it have, what are the properties of this image which indicate a miraculous origin, whereby it could not have been created naturally or artistically through magical tricks and stuff like that the priest might have done or been in on to as a scheme to make money or deceive people or something like that. Well, I looked, there are zero details. Now, I have to admit this, it's just been officially recognized by the Vatican. However, even though it's recently just been accepted, the study was conducted back in 2013, years ago, and it's been 12 years since then. And the scientific study wrapped up years ago. There have been no papers published in peer-reviewed literature, nothing published by the scientists as to what was done that I'm aware of or could find. And I just went, well, maybe I suck at researching online, and maybe the papers are out there and I'm just unaware of them. So I reached out to all my contacts, including Dr. Michael Lofton from the Reason and Theology podcast, hardcore Roman Catholic, has every motivation to give me I asked him, do you know what was done? What were the scientific study entailing? Who were the scientists? Do you have any sources or papers? He says, no, he knows nothing. I reached out to Dr. Kelly Kears, who knows personally people who actually study scientific miracles and Eucharistic miracles and stuff like that. And he said he knows nothing about what the scientific study was or what it entailed or what the results and findings were. It's a complete blackout, at least as of yet. Maybe more details will be posted in time. But so again, I have no empirical evidence to help me decide in terms of the nature of this image. Is it artistic, natural, a magic trick? Is it actually supernatural? What are the properties? I don't have a clue. I don't know. And therefore, I can't even feature a guess as to, it's equally probable to my mind whether it's a fake or whether it's actually miraculous. Based on the testimony, I have the testimony of one person who has a provable motivation to lie, but we have no reason to think he actually did lie. We have no reason to think he didn't lie. So the testimony of one person is irrelevant to me in this context. I don't believe him. I don't disbelieve him. I'm agnostic on this front until maybe I get to know him a bit and stuff like that. So we have the testimony of one person with a provable motivation to make something up, and that's it. That's the sole evidence that I have. And I have certain theological problems whereby the image doesn't seem to fit God's MO and seems to be counterproductive in terms of saying, well, hey, there's a discrepancy between this and the Shroud of Turin, discrepancy between this and the Veil of Veronica, for that matter. I guess if you want to say that, this does not look it doesn't fit God's MO. The shroud images are diffuse to the naked eye. These seem to be clear and artistic with definable borders. Look at those eyeballs. The eyes are nice and open, and you can clearly see the pupils definable. The beard is different. The hair is different. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of differences there. And finally, even if this is a supernatural miracle, it's totally inconsistent with God's MO in terms of previous Eucharistic miracles. Why is he creating this image on the bread? How does that in any way support Catholicism, apart from the fact that it took place in a Catholic church. And I don't think that is specific enough to qualify as a religion authenticating miracle, because there are videos on the internet where miracles take place in every kind of church. Heck, there's miracle claims, some of which may be even probable, taking place in other religions. And I think that's because miracles that take place in various churches aren't necessarily designed to authenticate the message. You need something in addition to the location. So yeah, the context of this miracle is too vague to establish that there is an authenticating motivation on God's part to make these images. I don't think it's trying to authenticate a certain doctrinal or religious message at all. And in no way does it support transubstantiation, which the other Eucharistic miracles, admittedly, if they are true and if they are provably supernatural, that would seem to be indicative more of a transubstantiation or perhaps a consubstantiation type of view. And it would discredit or seem to discredit Protestant views of the spiritual presence of Christ and or a symbolic interpretation of the Eucharist. This miracle doesn't do that by just showing an image of Jesus on it. Yeah, I wish I could give you more. I tried my best. I reached out to my contacts. If something else comes out later on, I'll do another show updating this. Maybe I could ask Massimo Paris, because he's connected to Franco Serafini. But for the moment, I'm just agnostic on this. It's totally, there's no data that is relevant or substantive in helping me to decide. And in fact, based on theological considerations, I would say this is probably a fake. Very weak case. I wouldn't be overly confident about it, but I would just say, yeah, there's too many theological inconsistencies to believe this is an authentic Eucharistic miracle. But at the end of the day, I want to let the empirical evidence be the and direct evidence for its miraculous origin have the ultimate say. Allegedly, there are scientific studies. Great. No information is available about them. So I'm agnostic. That's useless. I can't believe or disbelieve on that basis. Testimonial evidence. Oh, well, it was witnessed by multiple people. No, it wasn't. Only one person witnessed the actual miraculous event or act of black dot to face. And that's all we have. The testimony of one person who's provably motivated to lie, whether they actually lied or not. And I have no reason to trust or distrust this person's testimony because I don't know anything about them at all. I'm agnostic, and I think that is the only warranted position for everyone to take at this point, given the sheer lack of information or data, and let alone empirical evidence about this image. It's night and day. With the Shroud of Turin, we have dozens of peer-reviewed papers written by the credible STURP scientists after detailed scientific investigation. We know the properties of the images, and it's on the basis of what we know, the physical and chemical properties that warrant us in saying these images are miraculous, and therefore given the authentications of Jesus Christ and the gospel claims of his death and resurrection. In this case, this is just an image, and he's alive. His eyes are open and stuff like that. This, unlike the Shroud images, doesn't even have the advantage of authenticating something like the death or resurrection, something that all Christians can embrace. Just having this face it doesn't really authenticate much at all, if anything. I'm agnostic on this, and I think we need to await further confirmation. The authority of the church is meaningless to me as a Protestant. Couldn't care less what they accept or don't. I care about why they accept it. What's the evidence for it? So I'm awaiting the scientific evidence from the supposed studies that took place years ago. And unless and until I see that and look into that, what that entailed, who was involved, what exactly was done, and hopefully provided with empirical observational evidence that someone can look at. I'm just remaining agnostic on this India thing. So yeah, that's it. I hope that helps, and that's it for the fan request shows. So yeah, take care, everybody.